Chapter 18, Food Stuck in Teeth. The Friday before 4th of July weekend, I set my intention to do no harm to the already headless misinformation. In fact, as she sat next to me with her hand resting on her genuine human hair head, I realized she was proof that this was not the same day. At the beginning of our class, her head was on her shoulders. So much of our etiquette training has stood the test of time, Miss Melton Mowry began. However, fears over the spread of disease have changed how we politely deal with basic body functions, and today we will focus on those changes. I know that schools teach children the most sanitary way to cough or sneeze. This seemed like basic stuff, making it safe to play a round of frisbee golf in my mind. Is that right, Mr. Bean? Miss Corcoran? Miss Corcoran? I see what you're saying, Miss Melton Mowry. I'd been caught daydreaming, a hole-in-one that sailed right over the duck pond to be exact. But I wonder, I continued, hoping Officer Weston and Delton would help me out, does everyone feel that way? Delton covered for me by giving Miss Melton Mowry the rundown on how we'd learned to cough and sneeze into our elbow in preschool, more or less bringing me up to speed. The trouble is, coughing into one's elbow has a way of drawing attention to oneself. Miss Eminem said after Delton's impressive demonstration, "There are subtler ways, especially if you're not infectious. The back of the wrist is an excellent alternative. Let's practice that for a minute, shall we?" Officer Weston raised his hand. "Excuse me, Miss Melton Mowry, but I have an etiquette emergency. Can we cover things that get stuck in your mouth? Last night, Elizabeth had a piece of spinach in her teeth." He opened his mouth and pointed to his front two chompers. "Right here." "And you alerted her to this how?" "Like I'm doing right now," I pointed. "Yes, well, we can add that to our list." Miss Melton Mowry looked up at the ceiling and then back at us. "I'd appreciate it. The word Claude came up again right before she stomped to the ladies' room, but I have no idea what I did wrong. I mean, it was as plain as the nose on her face. How was I supposed to have polite conversation with a blob of spinach was playing peekaboo with me?" A noise escaped from Delton's mouth that sounded suspiciously like a giggle. To cover it, he raised his hand. "Miss Melton Mowry, if this is the time for special requests, I'd like to know if there's any special etiquette for picnics. Our neighborhood 4th of July picnic is this Monday, and both Miss Corcoran and I will be in attendance. I remember last year Cassidy—" "Seems to me that Mr. Bean and Miss Elizabeth could use a good dose of etiquette class," I said. "You are changing topics, Mr. Bean and Miss Elizabeth, for stomping. Even I know that stomping isn't polite." Miss Corcoran isn't correct. Miss Corcoran is correct. We need to stay on task, and I'm afraid picnics are not in our purview at this time. You'll have to do your best with transfer of knowledge, Mr. Bean. Officer Weston, I'm sure we'll breeze through this lesson and have time for blobs of spinach at the end of class. Now to practice." Miss Melton Mowry demonstrated a fake cough, holding the back of her wrist up to her mouth. We all copied her. "There is no need to make contact with your wrist, Miss Corcoran. Simply hold it up to shield others from your cough. Remember, the point is not to draw attention to yourself." "That's a big challenge for Cassidy," Delton said. Sorry, Miss Corcoran." To show Delton how very wrong he was, I stopped goofing around and coughed politely, using the back of my wrist. "How about sneezing?" I asked. "Same drill?" "Thank you, Miss Corcoran. Yes, same drill. The only tip I have for you here is to remember to keep your nose down slightly." "I get it. To control the force of the blast?" Officer Weston asked. Miss Melton Mowry coughed into the back of her hand again, but it was pretty obvious she was laughing this time. "Officer Weston, your language is so colorful." "Yes, it is," I agreed. When you get hitched to Elizabeth, you'll have to talk in black and white." "I know." Officer Weston shoved his hands in his pockets and studied the floor. Getting married to a girl who thought etiquette was the bee's knees made me wonder about Officer Weston's mental state. Did this start with his hairy legs too? Did all men and boys lose their marbles over a pretty girl? He once let it slip during polite conversation that he called her Honey Bun, since her real name is Miss Honeycutt. Seems to me a honey bun should be covered in cinnamon glaze, not red lipstick. Why would a perfectly good guy like Officer Weston give himself a life sentence of talking about the fine weather and never getting the last of the mashed potatoes? I'd seen this honey bun after class. She wore big sunglasses, and she made him kiss her on the cheek so he didn't smear her lipstick. "Now don't be discouraged, Officer Weston," Miss Melton Mowry was saying. "Let's practice yawning politely, and then we'll move on to spinach." I didn't need practice yawning since I'd got plenty of that during previous etiquette lessons. We learned from Miss Melton Mowry that you could cover up little yawns. You could cover up little yawns by pressing your lips together. If it was a whopper and pressing your lips together meant that your eyes bugged out, you used your handy-dandy wrist back to shield your companions from knowing that you were bored out of your mind. Now, to Officer Weston's emergency. It's equally likely that we'll encounter this issue at our luncheon. Alerting someone to an unpleasant situation, such as food stuck in her teeth, can be accomplished in the same way you summon a waiter, using the intensity of your gaze. I raised my hand. But didn't you say staring at people is rude? Staring, especially staring cross-eyed, Miss Corcoran, is rude. But as we've seen, the intensity of your gaze can be very useful. Observe. Without misinformation's head, I'll have to use Officer Weston as my example. Let's say that he has something stuck in his teeth. Now watch my face closely. We all watched as Miss Melton Mowry straightened her shoulders, picked up her knife and fork, and pretended to be cutting up food. She put an imaginary piece of food in her mouth and started to chew it. Smiling, she looked around the table, still pretending to chew and swallow. Finally, after another 2 bites of invisible food, she stopped and looked at Officer Weston. Her eyes opened wider as she tucked her chin. Even though her head was down, she kept looking at him. After about 30 seconds of this, she set down her fork and knife, picked up her napkin, and patted her mouth with it. Now, if you didn't know what all this was about, Officer Weston, how would you feel when I looked at you this way? Like you were trying to hypnotize me? That's not entirely off base. I am using my body language to help direct your thoughts. Couldn't you just slip me a toothpick? All that staring gave me the heebie-jeebies. If we were in a diner, possibly, but we'll be at the Egypt Valley Country Club, where they don't provide each table with a toothpick dispenser. Oh, that's not a problem. I always have some right here, patting his front pocket. Officer Weston continued. I have a gap between my 2 front teeth, more like a crevice, really. It's a magnet for popcorn. He demonstrated the effectiveness of the toothpick. I'm well aware of what a toothpick can do, Officer Weston. What I am trying to teach you, and the result Elizabeth hopes to achieve by having you take this class, is that we have evolved from ancient times when men stuck twigs in their mouths to dislodge bits of food. What we want to do is accomplish the task with minimum of distraction. What better way to accomplish the task than with a toothpick? Putting foreign objects into your mouth is not considered polite, Miss Melton Mowry said. I was beginning to think she could read my mind. But it's not foreign, Officer Weston protested, reaching into his pocket for the box. These diamond toothpicks are made in the USA. Miss Melton Mowry tweaked the creases of her blouse collar. Let's try Delton, shall we? Delton, if I'd looked at you that way and you suspected I was alerting you to something in your teeth, what would you do? I'd excuse myself and go to the bathroom to check. Exactly. There are 2 reasons for these subtle maneuvers, Officer Weston and Miss Corcoran. 1, it is not conducive to the appetites of other diners to see someone minding their mouths for bits of food at the table. 2, it is a courtesy to the dining companion who may have food lodged in her teeth to draw as little attention to it as possible. But what if you're wrong and your food gets cold? I wanted to know. Cold food is not conducive to my appetite. Miss Melton Mowry directed the intensity of her gaze at me. There was something to this staring stuff. In polite society, Officer Weston, couples often develop subtle cues that they give each other in situations such as these. You mean like how Jim Leland used sign language to tell Verlander to throw a slider? Officer Weston proceeded to do a good imitation of the former Detroit Tigers' manager calling pitches from the dugout. More subtle, Officer Weston. Remember, subtlety. He moved from hand gestures to wiggling fingers. More like a touch on the shoulder or a meaningful look. Like this, I put my hand on Misinformation's shoulder, ducked my head, and batted my eyelashes. Yes, more like that. What were you conveying, Miss Corcoran? Officer Weston wanted to know. I was suggesting she might like to excuse herself to the ladies' room to see if she could find her missing head. That afternoon, I got on my bike and retraced my route all the way to Livy's house, timing my arrival to be the same as when I'd first seen her jumping head. I was hoping to get another sighting. Nothing. Quiet. No dog. No bouncing. There was a car in the driveway and a tricycle on the front walk, so I leaned my bike against the mailbox, careful to not let the wheels smash any more flowers, went up to the front door and rang the bell. A mom answered, drying her hands on a dish towel. Hello, she said. Hello there, I'm Cassidy Corcoran. I held out my hand and shook hers. Never mind, it was still wet. I'm so pleased to make your acquaintance. It doesn't hurt to make a good first impression on moms, especially moms whose houses smelled like they had been baking with cinnamon. I was wondering if Miss Olivia was at home. Livy, my Olivia? Are you sure you have the right address, dear? Livy doesn't, well, she doesn't usually have friends with manners like yours. Was that a compliment or no? I waited for her to answer my question. Where are my manners? I'm Mrs. Dunn, Livy's mom. Mrs. Dunn set down her dish towel and picked up an envelope and a piece of paper from the table in the hall. Did you say Cassidy? I nodded. Livy's gone to summer camp already, Cassidy. Oh, do you know when she'll be back? At least 8 weeks, that is, if all goes well. Mrs. Dunn put her hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry you missed her, but she left something for you. For me? Are you sure? I held out my hand for the envelope. I'm afraid you have to swear an oath first. Would you be willing to do that? Pinky swear? Spit swear? If there's blood involved, I might have to request a Band-Aid. I'm sure raising your hand would be sufficient. I raised my hand while Mrs. Dunn squinted at the paper. Her handwriting. She turned again and picked up a pair of glasses from the hall table and read. Do you, Cassidy, sorry I forgot your last name, promise to commit the Chipmunk Code to memory, to destroy the original, and to never divulge this key or any message created with it to anyone under the age of 21, most specifically and especially any living boys? P.S. All animals and birds except talking parrots are okay. Mrs. Dunn looked up at me. I do. Well then, there you are. At the exact moment she handed me the envelope, we heard a loud thudding noise on the stairway behind her. I stretched until I could see the three monster pirates sliding down the staircase on what looked like an upside-down bath mat. Man the controls, Captain, we're going down! Mrs. Dunn threw her body in front of the door so they wouldn't slide right outside. Lovely to meet you, dear, she said, and slammed the door. There was no point in going right home. Nosy Magda was sure to smell a mystery, and since she was a living person, I couldn't let her see the code. No, this was mine. I kept on riding to Riverside Park and found an empty swing. Tearing open the envelope, I pumped my legs a few times and looked over what Livy sent. Cassidy, here's my address. After you memorize the Chipmunk Code, which was created by me and my last best friend, Judy Hanson, you should write me a letter in code. It is deadly boring here when we're not doing flips, so make it interesting, and that's an order. Chipmunk Code. And she has listed all the letters of the alphabet and a symbol that matches each letter. For example, the letter A has a heart, the letter I is an eyeball, the letter O is a cloud with a lightning bolt, the letter T is a light bulb, and the letter X is a rainbow, the letter Z is a butterfly, etc. For every letter of the alphabet, the Chipmunk Code had a picture. A was a heart, B was a kite, C was a candy cane. So now I had to memorize this and write Livy a letter. We never got to the point where I told her I don't like memorizing or writing. Couldn't I just steal Magda's phone and text her? Pumping higher, I'd stuck the code in my back pocket, wondering if Livy wanted me to be her new best friend. I liked the idea of being best friends with a girl who had a trampoline, but if I couldn't use it all summer, what use was that? I needed to think more about this, but swinging cross-legged and cross-armed is a life-threatening activity. Would falling out of a swing and breaking my neck be interesting enough for Livy Dunn, I wondered? For someone I just met, she had a lot of requirements. Cassidy, may I borrow your hands after dinner? Dad asked me as we were finishing our exciting dessert of yogurt and pineapple bits. Do they have to be connected to my body? As a matter of fact, they do. Borrow your hands usually meant Dad had a fix-it project, and that meant he needed my help. He's not good with tools like Jack or his dad, and I can tell it really bothers him when Mom suggests we ask one of them for help, like she did last week when there was a leak under the kitchen sink. The good news is, during Tigers season, that meant Dad and I would go down to the basement and listen to the game on Granddad's old transistor radio. I would have Dad all to myself, no Magda dissertations on mold, for at least half an hour, and sometimes things even got fixed. Tonight we carried the silverware drawer down to the basement. Lucky you, Dad said as he emptied the forks and spoons onto the counter. You can practice setting the table while I work. Maybe, I pushed the pile away. If we have time, let's fix something first. Mom tells me these drawers aren't gliding, but the wheels work okay. Dad turned the drawer over and held it up to his eye, looking down the drawer glide like it was a telescope. He handed the drawer to me so he could tune in the ball game. It was the third inning. Tigers are down 2-1. The crackling of the radio and the familiar voice of the announcer, Dan Dickerson, made the back of my neck prickle. Listening to the Tigers in the basement with my dad was like, I don't know, like playing an epic game of freeze tag. It just felt right. I'll take it back now. Dad held out his hand for the drawer. My fingers were covered in grease after running them along the glides. Ugh, what is this? Engine oil? It's not the first time Mom's complained. I applied some WD-40 to them a few months ago. I think that makes them stick worse, Dad. Oil doesn't make things sticky, Miss Cassidy. It makes them slippery. I patted Dad's shoulder, trying to come up with a nice way to say it. I can see how you would think that, but when you put oil on something exposed like these glides, it attracts dust and dirt, and that's what makes it stick worse. Really? Dad swiped along the glide and got a black stripe on his finger. He sniffed it, just like Magda always did. Turn up the volume, Dad. I think Avila just got on. So you're saying I made things worse? What I'm saying is we can fix this. Hand me that bottle of oil eater, will you? Dad handed me the bottle and a clean rag. Then he sat in one of our lawn chairs so his ear was closer to the radio. 2 on and 2 out. Kinsler's up. I started rubbing. Dad, if I was sworn not to tell something to a boy, would that include you? Though I am male, I am not technically a boy. So depending on how much you needed to talk about it, Dad stopped talking and looked at me. I would say, since I'm no longer a boy, it does not include me. So I told him about Livy, how she was all of a sudden there and then not there, how she seemed to want to be my new best friend, and how her code reminded me of hobo signs, but it wasn't so easy to memorize, especially on top of all the stuff I had to learn about manners. Very interesting. He handed me a new cloth in trade for the blackened one I gave him. This young lady seems mercurial. What's that mean? It means that her mood changes a lot, but then she also sounds adventurous. I can see why you're drawn to her. Donna Parker says I remind her of Livy. She does she? I guess I'll memorize the code. At least it makes more sense to me than etiquette class. Only if you want to, Cass. This assignment is voluntary. What I really want is for me and Jack to hang out like we used to, and to take him over to jump on the Dunn's trampoline between 1 and 2 while the little monsters take their rest. Come here. Dad pulled me onto his lap. Let's listen to the game. If I worked my way to the side of the chair and put my head on Dad's chest, I could still fit, with one ear listening to his heart and one listening to the game. Brian Corcoran didn't have to prove he was a fan. His heartbeat took off for the races. Whenever Dickerson announced a hit, it's a fly ball right over Sizemore's head, but no, caught at the bleachers. Tough luck, Tigers. How's it going down there, you two? Mom called down at the top of the 5th. Fine. I jumped off Dad's lap and he picked up the drawer. We're cleaning the glides, he called up. You must be doing a thorough job. She waited for an answer, but when we didn't give her one, she closed the door. Are we done, Cass? Dad asked. Are you kidding? The game's tied. Running his finger over the clean glides, Dad asked what more we could do that would last 4 innings. What we need is something to make them slippery, something that doesn't attract dirt. We heard the crack of the bat. I'd lost Dad to the game again. Darn, caught in foul territory. Slippery. Soap? I said that doesn't attract dirt, Dad. Try to focus, will you? I've never been good at multitasking. That's okay. I have another idea. Keep your ear glued. I went upstairs and asked Mom for some wax paper. I suppose this is a full 9-inning project, she said, handing over the box. You can tell your dad I enjoyed my quality time with the dinner dishes. Sure. Slamming the basement door, I ran back downstairs. Mom opened it behind me. I hope he's at least quizzing you on place settings. You have to set the table in your next class. Roger that. Nothing's changed, Dad told me. Still no outs. I tore off a sheet of wax paper and rubbed it along the clean glide. And what will this accomplish? Just an idea I have. I didn't mention that it came from watching Mr. Taylor run a piece of wax paper over the teeth of his zipper jacket to get it unstuck. We polished the glides for a while, then gave up and listened to the end of the game. Tigers eked out a 3-2 win. But even sweeter was when we were back upstairs and Dad said, Cassidy, you are a genius, as I reinserted the drawer and it slid smoothly along the track. Thank you, sweetie. After a big bear hug, he added, now to that other little chore, memorizing the place setting. Ugh. I stuck out my tongue and crossed my eyes. What difference does it make where everything goes as long as you can reach what you need? But you wouldn't know whose is whose, would you? It makes it easier with rules. That's what all grown-ups say. Think about baseball. Imagine if the players decided to run to home whenever they felt like it. It would be a free-for-all and no fun to watch. But when the batter runs to first base while the third baseman is stealing home, that creates a tension. Then we're on the edge of our seats. Etiquette creates tension too. It gives me a tension headache. In etiquette, there are rules for different reasons. Let's say you had a delicious meal set in front of you and you went to take a drink of water, and the person on your right was drinking from your glass and the person on the left was drinking from his glass. How are you supposed to get any water? Excuse yourself and go to the water fountain? All right then, say it was a cherry Coke. Dad was upping the ante. Mom doesn't keep cherry Coke in the house, and we are only allowed to drink it when we go out to eat, which is about twice a year. Then I'd have to wrestle somebody, and your fries would get cold. Dad had a point. I hate it when he has one of those. Okay, so teach me how to do this. You need to make a mental diagram. When we reorganize the store and I have to memorize where we've put everything in the new layout, I try to match it with something I already know, like our backyard. I tell myself, okay, produce is now along the the Benson's hedge. Dairy is by the back steps. Sundries are in the fire pit. What are sundries? Bottle openers, disposable lighters, that sort of thing. Let's have a look at that place setting diagram. Dad grabbed the diagram off the fridge and stared at it. He put his hand on my head and massaged it, which is how my dad does some of his best thinking. It's as plain as the nose on your face, Miss Cassidy, or should I say a plate? Home plate, to be exact. If I were imprisoned, pardon me, attending etiquette school, I'd memorize the place setting on a baseball field, and I'd make this. He grabbed a dish from the drainer. Home plate. End of chapter 18.